On Friday, January the 20th, 2017, the 45th President of the United States will be sworn into office. The process for selecting the next president is already underway. I'm Bill Cowles, the Orange County Supervisor of Elections, and in this special edition of Elections and You, the Voter, we will take an in-depth look at each of the steps in the selection of the next president. We will be looking at what impact does the 2010 census and reapportionment have on the selection? Why do we have presidential preference primaries or state caucuses? Why have a national convention, and how have they changed? The popular vote will happen on Tuesday, November the 8th, 2016. And finally, the Electoral College, which is where the next president and vice president of the United States are formally elected. To help us better understand each of these phases of electing a president, we are joined by Dr. Terry Fine, Professor of Political Science, and Associate Director and Senior Fellow of the Lou Frye Institute of Politics and Government at UCF. Welcome, Terry.
Nice to be here.
Nice to have you. And to Dr. Aubrey Jewett, the Associate of Political Science at UCF. Welcome, Aubrey.
Nice to be here.
Let's start our discussion by looking at the impact of the 2010 census and how it will affect the selection of the next president. And I think, Terry, we have some maps that will help better explain that.
Absolutely.
All right, let's talk about the population change that's happened with the 2010 census.
You know, Bill, it's a little known fact that in 1911, the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate capped its size at 435. So what that means is that even if a state were to gain population, they could still lose representation in the U.S. House of Representatives because there's still a limited number of seats to go around. So in 2010, one state actually lost population, but 10 states lost seats in the House of Representatives.
All right, so let's clarify a little bit about those changes. Looking at this map with how reapportionment happened. What state lost?
Well, in fact, my home state of New York lost, and my current home state of Florida gained. And so up until the 2010 census and the reapportionment after that, New York had 4 more seats than Florida. Now Florida's gained 2, New York has lost 2, and now they're both even at 29 seats each, which means that if a candidate wins either of those states because of the way the Electoral College works, they're more than 10% to the goal to win the presidential election.
That's it. All right, so we look at the ones that have changed a little bit, and again, we're going to get into the discussion about how these numbers play into the selection of a president. And so we look at the seats, and so Aubrey, Florida now has how many congressional districts?
Well, we gained 2, so we're up to 27.
Right.
And as Terry was saying, because of our population growth, we were up to about 19 million. We gained 3 million over the course of the decade from 2000 to 2010. And so then that meant we got 2 more seats in Congress, and that gives us 2 more electoral votes for the presidential race.
And in the 4 years since the census was taken, Florida now has moved ahead of New York in total population.
Yes, that's right,
and
officially.
The census calls us the 3rd. All right, well, let's look at the Florida. How do we divide up the congressional districts in Florida?
Well, basically what Congress does is they tell, after the census, each state how many congressional seats they will have. And for any state that gets more than 1, they then have to apportion themselves, they have to split themselves up. And so in Florida's case, we were given 27 seats. So the way I describe it to my students is basically you have to take the state of Florida and cut it up into 27 puzzle pieces. And there's a few rules that go along with that. The main one being that each district has to have the same number of people.
Right.
They don't have to be the same geographic size. In fact, they're widely different as far as the square mileage of these districts, but they do have to have the same number of people.
Where are we at with the process? Because there's been a major change here.
Yes, well, in Florida a few years ago, the voters approved something called the Fair Districts Amendment. And it was designed to reduce or eliminate partisan gerrymandering and incumbent gerrymandering, and also to try to protect minority voting rights and to make districts more compact. And so the legislature actually draws the districts But this time around, they actually had to draw the districts trying to use these rules that had been put in place by the voters.
Right.
So with the congressional seats, what happened was they drew the districts, but then there was a lawsuit filed that they had not followed the rules. And just recently, the Florida Supreme Court ruled that they really didn't follow the rules very well at all, and thus they have to redraw many of these congressional districts in time for the next election.
Oh, and the timeline is very short because the presidential preference primary are right around the corner. So let's summarize. There's how many districts?
There are
in the country?
27 districts, and right now it's about 711,000 people for each congressional district.
Dr. Fine, Dr. Jewett, thank you so much for your information, and we'll be right back in just a moment.